Day 4. Charles Dickens did write his books about Mr. Pickwick, Scrooge, Tiny Tim, and about many other characters besides. In time, his books filled whole shelves. Not that any of them ever seemed to stay on a shelf, said B.W., and he said it most proudly. People are always taking them down and reading them. There doesn't seem to be any end to the books and to the marvelous characters who live in your books. And what sort of people do you think read Charles Dickens' books? They were all types of people, princes and parlor maids, lords and ladies, servants and coachmen, young and old. One and all, they were fascinated by the men and women and children who were brought to life by Charles Dickens' imagination. When they read a story by Dickens, people could picture the way it looked in a blacking factory. They could know more now how it felt to be in debtor's prison. The books caused people to use their own imaginations. People want your books, said B.W. to Charles, but they want something else from you, too. Can you guess what it was? They want to meet you, Charles, said the bookworm. They want to hear you read your books out loud to them. So Charles began to travel throughout England, reading to large audiences. People cried when he read to them about families in debtor's prison, about children working in long hours in dirty factories. They laughed when he described parties and dances and wonderful trips into the country. Charles Dickens' books were also very popular in America. Some people even went down to the wharves to wait at the ships came from England, bringing the latest stories by Dickens. And when Dickens himself went to the United States to read his stories to people, there were enormous crowds at the pier to greet him. While Charles was in America, something was happening in England. What do you suppose it was? Parliament was passing laws to protect children from having to work too hard and at too young of an age. They were also passing laws closing the debtor's prison and laws that made it possible for even poor children to go to school. Many things were happening in England, including the fact that thousands of people had read Charles Dickens' stories. The stories made people think about how hard it is to be poor in England, and they wanted to make things better for everyone. Then one night, after Charles returned from his trip to America, hundreds of people got together to tell him exactly what his books meant to them. They gave a great dinner in Charles Dickens' honor in a gigantic dining room. Your imagination, Mr. Dickens, has given us great pleasure, said one of the hosts. You have allowed us to meet some of the most interesting characters and to go inside some of the most unusual places simply by reading your books. You have become the most popular novelist of our times because your imagination has made our own lives more enjoyable, and you have helped to change some of our English laws so that they are more fair to more people. B.W. fought back a tear, and he smiled, a thing that bookworms seldom do. And Charles Dickens felt proud and happy. Both of his childhood dreams have come true. Do you remember what those two dreams were? There it is. Charles Dickens dreamed about and worked very hard to become a great storyteller, and indeed he became one of the best in the land. And, as you may remember, he also dreamed that one day he would live in the great house on Gad's Hill. And after he had written many books, he bought and lived in that very same house. I'm glad some of your dreams came true, B.W. said to Charles. Yes, said Charles. But of course, sometimes our dreams don't come true. What's more important is to have dreams. Just using my imagination makes me feel happy. Perhaps you may want to think about how you feel when you use your imagination. What you choose to do with your imagination may be very different from what Charles Dickens did with his. But whatever you decide to do with your imagination, let's hope it makes you happier. Just like it did for our good friend Charles Dickens.